Hello, it's good to have you here. I hope the world's been kind to you. May your health be strong, your spirits high, and your day be filled with small successes. Life, as we know, isn't always a grand gesture. The quiet, steady things in life that help sustain us, like salt. Today, we're diving into something as ordinary as it is extraordinary. Salt. It is a simple mineral, yet it holds weight, stretches back through, and touches almost every part of human life. It's been traded, fought over, worshipped, and preserved. And here we are, exploring its story together. So let's go on, friends, with a bit of curiosity and a bit of wonder. Here's to the steady, constant, and sometimes more meaningful than they seem. Thanks for being here.
Salt. It has been scattered across the earth, measured in handfuls and barrels, yet it remains mysterious. A small thing that holds weight. Salt is part of the oldest stories and travels down the earliest roads. Humans learned to take it from the sea and from the earth itself. Along the Yangtze River 6,000 years ago, they carved it out, one grain at a time, letting it dry in the sun, the salt of life itself. The Romans sent their soldiers along the Via Salaria, trading salt to sustain their empire. In the Sahara, caravans of camels carried it across deserts, blocks of salt worth as much as gold. It sustained, preserved, and endured. We know what salt does in our kitchens and how it brings flavor to food, but its purpose reaches beyond our tables. For thousands of years, salt has represented power and protection, purity and permanence. Its weight was felt in the way it saved food from spoiling and in the way it saved lives. But salt is more than this. It is the physical that becomes spiritual, a bridge between the ordinary and the eternal. The first civilizations didn't just use salt. They respected it and made it a part of their lives and their rituals. They understood something that goes beyond science. Salt was life, but it was also something more. From here, we'll go deeper. We'll look at the lives and beliefs of people who took salt in their hands and saw it as a way to cleanse, protect, and bless. In Japan, salt scatters across the sumo ring, warding off dark spirits. In the homes of early Christians, salt was sprinkled to protect against what they could not see. Salt, small, crystalline, becomes a force. And as we follow, we see its power and legacy in the simple act of preservation. Salt is an everyday thing. A small, familiar friend in a bowl on the table, pinched between fingers, scattered across plates. But for thousands of years, salt has been something more. In every corner of the world, it has held a power beyond flavor, a force that protects, preserves, and stands against unseen threats. In Japan, the salt of the earth becomes the salt of the ring. Sumo wrestlers scatter it in a ritual older than memory. A handful thrown into the air before every match, an offering and a warning. Salt clears the ground, makes it pure, out any spirits lurking in the shadows. They believe it cleanses the space, drives out darkness, and purifies the earth they fight upon. It's not a seasoning here. It's a line between what can harm and what can be kept safe. In India, salt has always been sacred. During Diwali, the festival of lights, families place salt in corners and around their doorways. It's more than protection, a statement of purity, a reminder that the home is sacred. They trust it to cleanse, to guard what is dear. Diwali comes once a year, as a celebration. However, this ritual involving salt remains constant. It's woven into daily life, an invisible barrier against what can't be seen, and they believe in it as if it were faith itself. Early Christians knew salt as more than a mineral. In the darkened halls and hidden homes of the early church, salt was mixed with holy water and used to purify. They used it to bless, to shield against evil. A sprinkle at the door, a pinch in the water, and salt became a way to guard what they couldn't see. It was their defense, their way to claim sacred ground in a world that often felt anything but. In each of these practices, salt does more than season or preserve. It becomes a symbol, a protector, a barrier between the known and the unknown. It's scattered across thresholds, sprinkled on battlegrounds, and poured into holy water. It's small, almost invisible, But to those who believe, it's powerful enough to keep harm at bay. Salt is simple, but when laid out in these ways, it takes on a purpose greater than itself. In Japan, the sumo wrestler's ring is purified. In India, homes are blessed and cleansed, turned into safe places of light. And in the homes of early Christians, salt is a shield, a way to hold off whatever may come knocking at the door. And so we see salt as more than substance. It's a bridge, a way to connect the physical and the spiritual, to bring protection where words and walls cannot. With this understanding, we see salt's place in the world, a place it has held since the earliest civilizations first learned to trust it, to revere it, and to rely on it for more than what meets the eye. Salt holds immense power over food, nations, and people. Empires have risen and fallen throughout history, and in those narratives, salt is always present, strong, and silent. Rome, France, and China have all used salt for various purposes, not merely as a commodity, but as a means of control. In its simple, unchanging form, salt can unite people, create structure, and serve as the invisible line between those who hold power and those who do not. In Rome, they paid their soldiers with salt or equivalent. This wasn't charity, it was a necessity. Salt preserved the rations that fed the legions and allowed the empire to expand. Soldiers received their salary, a word born from salt, and they marched under its value, their strength resting in every grain. Roman generals, their strategies mapped across continents, knew that without salt, their food would rot, their men would weaken, and the empire would fall. The Via Salaria, the salt road, wound across Italy, moving salt from one end of the empire to another. It was more than a road. It was a lifeline. In France, salt's power was twisted. In the 14th century, King Philip VI introduced the gabelle, a tax on salt. What started as revenue grew into a heavy yoke. By the 17th century, nearly everyone had to buy a set amount of salt, whether they could afford it. It fueled resentment, and it wasn't just about the salt. It was about control, about one group's ability to dictate the lives of others. In 1789, the revolution came, and the gavel became a symbol, one small part of a larger rebellion against oppression. And then in China, salt shaped a dynasty. The Qin dynasty, more than 2,000 years ago, established a salt monopoly. Their leaders, their scholars, and even Confucius himself saw that salt was no ordinary resource. By the Tang dynasty, salt provided nearly half the government's revenue. Without it, the empire's infrastructure, its military, and its very existence would have been threatened. Salt was the quiet heartbeat of power, funding roads, armies, and fortifications. Salt's role was never loud, but it was essential. It separated the rulers from the ruled, the strong from the weak. In these empires, salt held everyone in its silent grasp, preserving the old ways and maintaining stability until the balance shifted. To control salt was to control life. It was wealth and power in the shape of small, white crystals. But salt's influence didn't stop at governance. It became a bridge to the spiritual. This invisible hold, this stabilizing force, began to reflect something sacred, something that bound the physical and the spiritual together. And so salt moved forward, not only as a substance, but as a symbol of enduring strength and purity. In the Bible, salt is more than a mineral. It's a warning, a covenant, a constant. When they wrote the stories, they understood salt as more than something you tasted. Salt was an element with weight, as eternal as the rocks, which could bind and judge. The story of Lot's wife is as old as time. She looked back at the city destroyed, and for that single glance, she was transformed into a pillar of salt. It was a harsh punishment. It was meant to make a point. She wasn't just disobedient. She felt a strong connection to a place filled with corruption beyond saving. The salt of her body became a warning to anyone who would look back at what should be left behind. Salt was divine judgment, the line between purity and ruin, a testament set in stone to the consequences of disobedience. Then there's the covenant of salt, a promise from God, everlasting and unbreakable. In ancient Israel, they sealed their agreements with salt, understanding it as something that would endure. Food goes bad over time, metal rusts, but salt preserves. In the book of Numbers, God calls it the covenant of salt, a pact he made with his people, stable and unwavering. This covenant wasn't temporary. It was bound by the strength of salt itself, as solid as rock, as endless as the sea. For the people of that time, salt represented more than seasoning. It symbolized permanence, a pledge that could not be broken. In Leviticus, there's a command to season every grain offering with salt. This wasn't for flavor, it was for purity, for dedication. The people knew salt could be preserved and protected, so they offered it to God as a symbol of their sincerity. Their offerings were seasoned with salt because they wanted them to endure, to be preserved in the eyes of the Almighty. Salt became part of their worship, a small crystal carrying the weight of their faith. Salt wasn't just sprinkled on the earth, but through their beliefs in every promise. It was more than a mineral. It was a symbol, a way of connecting to something unchanging. It held the power to bless, judge, protect, and purify. Through these stories, salt's meaning grew. It wasn't just a mineral, but a bridge between man and God, connecting the fragile with the eternal. Moving from these ancient texts to everyday life, we see salt as sacred, binding, and enduring. When Jesus spoke about salt, he wasn't referring to the kind sprinkled on food. He used it as a powerful metaphor, inviting people to grasp a deeper understanding of their faith and purpose. In the Gospel of Matthew, he calls his followers the salt of the earth, a bold and profound statement, carrying a significance far beyond what they might have realized. Salt preserves. It keeps food from spoiling and keeps it fresh, even when everything around it changes and decays. The hot, dusty streets of ancient Palestine, they knew what salt could do. It kept things from rotting. Jesus was saying that they, his followers, were the preservers who would keep goodness alive in a world that had a way of spoiling things. He is the strength that supports and sustains, even when the world turns dark. But he didn't stop there. He gave a warning. If the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? If they lost their faith and their commitment, they would lose everything. In those days, they knew salt could go bad. The Dead Sea, their primary salt source, often produced salt mixed with minerals that would diminish its flavor and make it unusable. The people understood that if they didn't protect their faith, it could fade and lose its strength, much like the salt from the Dead Sea. Jesus wasn't only talking about survival, he was talking about resilience, about purity. He asked his followers to remain strong, even when it was hard, even when the world around them was compromised. He was saying, be the salt, preserve what is good. And so salt became more than a symbol. It became a calling, a purpose. To be salt was to be different. Hold fast to what mattered and resist the decay around them. His words were not gentle, but they were true. He said their faith, like salt, had a purpose and wasn't for themselves alone. It was for the world. This call to be salt wasn't about isolation. It was about influence. Salt doesn't change itself. It changes what it touches. Jesus wanted his followers to bring that change, carry their faith into the world, make it better and purer, and keep it alive. His metaphor didn't end in words. It was a charge, a mission. As we step back from those words, we see what salt has always meant: a power, a purpose, a force that holds the world together even as it faces decay. For the early Christians, salt wasn't just a mineral. It was armor, a shield against forces they couldn't see, a way to protect what they held sacred. It became part of their rituals, a silent companion in their prayers, a handful of crystals that ward off the darkness. Consecrated salt mixed with holy water wasn't taken lightly. They believed it carried the blessing of God, that it would create a barrier between them and whatever evil lurked outside their doors. It was more than tradition, it was survival. They scattered it across thresholds, sprinkled it around their homes, and used it in ceremonies to cleanse. In a world where faith was often tested, salt became their way of holding the line, a defense they could hold in their hands. St. Augustine, in the 4th century, watched as his community blessed salt before using it in rituals. He saw its power, not in the salt itself, but in what it represented. It wasn't magic, but it was something close to it, a physical sign of faith, a way to make the invisible tangible. And they believed in it deeply. They believed it could drive out the darkness, purify their spaces, and make them safe. As the centuries passed, this faith in salt didn't fade. It moved through Europe in the Middle Ages, a time when the world seemed heavy with shadows. Salt was placed at windows, doors, and anywhere evil might enter. It was laid out like a line in the sand, a simple white crystal that meant safety. They believed in its power, even when they couldn't always see the results. Salt wasn't just about protection. In certain rituals, it was used to break curses, to free families from what they called generational curses. A pinch of salt, a whispered prayer, and they would speak of breaking ties, of cleansing the sins of the past. They believed that salt could clear the way and create a path where darkness once held sway. Salt for them became a symbol of purity, of resilience. It was something they could trust, something that had no agenda, no other purpose but to protect, to preserve. Consecrated salt wasn't just part of a ritual, it was a force, a weapon against anything that threatened what they loved. And even today, in quiet churches and in homes where faith remains strong, consecrated salt is still there. The rituals might have changed, but the belief hasn't. Salt is still seen as a shield, a way to hold back whatever may come. It's a small thing, a simple crystal, but to those who believe, it's a promise. A way to say, this place is safe, this place is blessed. Salt, in the world of alchemy and mysticism, is more than a mineral. It's the body, the foundation of transformation, the element that anchors spirit to flesh. For centuries, alchemists looked at salt and saw a piece of life's puzzle, a substance that could preserve, protect, and purify, but also transform. In salt's quiet stability, they saw wisdom, resilience, and a link to something eternal. In the alchemist's laboratory, salt was a key element, one of the three primes alongside mercury and sulfur. Each represented a part of the self. Mercury was the mind, sulfur the soul, and salt, the body. Salt was stable, constant, the part that kept life grounded. Medieval alchemists, with their secretive practices and coded symbols, looked to salt as a reminder that transformation isn't just about change. It's about preserving what matters, holding the spirit in place even as it grows and evolves. But alchemy wasn't the only path that saw salt's significance. In Islamic practices, salt became a tool for purification, a way to ward off unseen dangers. From the 7th century on, salt was sprinkled to cleanse spaces of negative energy, protecting homes and hearts from whatever might come through. Salt was not only protection, it was a bridge to the divine, a way to invite light into the darkest corners. In Buddhism, salt plays a role in protection. Salt is used in rituals to guard against and to keep balance in sacred spaces. During certain ceremonies, salt is poured, sprinkled, and laid in patterns that are said to hold power against forces that seek to harm. It's a small gesture, but it holds weight, a piece of the sacred made tangible. Salt, with its unbreakable structure, became a symbol across cultures of resilience, of purity that could not be tainted. Mystics saw it as something that could hold energy, something stable enough to contain both the good and the bad, the light and the dark. They trusted it to absorb what they didn't want and keep what they did. To them, salt wasn't just a mineral. It was a vessel, a container for what they needed to be protected. As these practices spread, salt's reputation grew. It wasn't strong, a quiet keeper of balance. In rituals, prayers, and alchemical transformations, salt became a way to hold on to purity, to stabilize and guard against what couldn't be seen but could be felt. Even now, salt's presence lingers in ceremonies across the world. It's placed in corners, sprinkled across thresholds, and used in baths and cleansings. It's easy to overlook, but to those who know, it's powerful. Salt is the constant, the quiet shield, a mineral that grounds, protects, and connects. It stands, silent, a piece of the eternal made real. Salt is more than seasoning. It's a symbol that has traveled through time, crossing lands and cultures, binding people to the earth and each other. It has endured, not because it is flashy or loud, but because it is steady. Salt is constant, reliable, and strong, a reminder of things that hold. In every handful of salt, there's a piece of the divine. From ancient rituals to quiet homes, salt has been a bridge between the tangible and the eternal. It's the crystal that guards thresholds, the pinch that blesses offerings, and the mineral that turns food into something lasting. People trusted it to preserve, to protect, to purify. They believed in it with the kind of faith you don't speak about, but hold close. Salt doesn't change, and that's its power. In a world that shifts and breaks, salt remains. And as long as it does, it stands as a silent promise, a reminder of resilience, purity, and strength. For the believer, salt that whispers of the sacred, a piece of the earth that touches the divine. As we carry this knowledge forward, we are reminded to honor the small things that hold weight and the things that protect without ceremony and endure without notice. Salt has taught us that power doesn't have to be loud to be strong. And so we embrace it, not just as a mineral, but as a testament to the quiet, enduring force that guards life. In salt, we find a legacy, a reminder that even the simplest things can carry the heaviest meaning. And with that, we go on, blessed and protected. Thank you for joining us today, friends. It's been wonderful to explore these ideas together and take a moment to reflect. May you move forward with good health, celebrate a few small victories, and carry a sense of peace to brighten your day. If today's journey stirred something in you, let us know. Leave a question or a thought, or share your own stories. Those are the pieces that make this journey richer. And if you found meaning here, consider liking, subscribing, or sharing it with the ones you hold close. Together, we keep these stories alive. Until we meet again, take care. May your path be steady, and may you always find strength in the quiet things that hold weight. Thanks for being here with us.